If you flew over central Turkey today, looked down from the window of a plane, you would see a quiet little town surrounded by some of the strangest rock formations on Earth. Tall, narrow pillars of stone rising out of the ground like ancient fingers, valleys carved by wind and rain into shapes that do not look like they belong on this planet. And in the middle of all of it, a dusty little town where people go about their day, drink tea, sell groceries, argue about politics. Nothing about this place would make you stop and stare. But if you could somehow peel back the surface, if you could lift that town up like a lid, you would find something underneath that would change the way you think about the ancient world forever. Because beneath this ordinary little town, carved straight down into solid rock, there are 18 floors of tunnels, rooms, churches, stables, wine cellars, schools, and secret passageways. Enough space to shelter 20,000 people. Enough engineering to keep them alive for months without ever seeing sunlight. And whoever built it did so for a reason so urgent, so pressing, that they spent generations digging deeper and deeper into the earth. The wildest part is that this place was completely forgotten. For 40 years, nobody on the surface had any idea it was there. Until one day, a man trying to figure out where his chickens kept disappearing accidentally stumbled into one of the greatest ancient discoveries of the 20th century. The year was 1963. The town is called Derinkuyu, which in Turkish means deep well, a fitting name for a place with secrets buried so far underground. A local man, whose name has never been recorded in any report or interview, was doing some renovation work in his home. Nothing special, just fixing up the basement. But he had been dealing with a strange little mystery for a while. His chickens kept vanishing, not in any dramatic way. There was no predator, no blood, no feathers left behind. The birds were simply there one day and gone the next. So he started paying closer attention, and eventually he spotted one of them squeezing through a narrow crack in his basement wall, slipping into the darkness behind it like it knew exactly where it was going. Curious, and probably a little annoyed, he grabbed his tools and began widening the crack. The wall gave way, and behind it was a room, not a closet. Not a crawl space, a room carved out of solid rock with smooth walls and a passage leading further into the dark. He followed it, and that passage opened into another room, and that room connected to a tunnel, and that tunnel dropped down into more tunnels, more rooms, more carved stone stretching deeper and deeper into the earth. What this man had found behind his basement wall was not a forgotten cellar. It was the entrance to an underground city that had been sealed away since 1923 and buried in memory long before that. To really understand Derinkuyu, you first have to understand Cappadocia, the region where it sits. Millions of years ago, a series of volcanic eruptions blanketed this part of Turkey in thick layers of ash. Over time, that ash compressed and hardened into a type of soft rock called tuff. And here is what makes tuff so remarkable. When it is freshly exposed, you can carve it with simple hand tools. You can shape it, hollow it out, sculpt it into almost anything. But once it has been exposed to air for a while, it hardens and becomes incredibly strong. The ancient people who lived here figured this out a very long time ago, and they used that knowledge in a way that still seems almost impossible. Instead of building upward, they built downward. They carved homes into cliff sides. They hollowed out entire churches inside rock formations. And in at least 200 locations across the Cappadocia landscape, they dug underground shelters of varying size. Some were small, just a few rooms. Others stretched across multiple levels. But none of them, not a single one, came close to the scale of what was hiding beneath Derinkuyu. This was not a shelter. This was a city. When archaeologists began excavating after the discovery, what they found floor by floor was staggering. The complex descends roughly 85 meters into the earth, about the height of a 20-story building, and it is spread across 8 excavated levels that were clearly designed for different purposes. The first floor was mainly used for animals. Stables carved into the rock held livestock during times when the population retreated underground. The second floor opened into something unexpected, a large room with a beautiful barrel-vaulted ceiling, believed to have been used as a school or gathering hall. It is one of the only rooms like it found in any underground city in the region. Deeper down, the third and fourth floors held living quarters, small rooms with niches carved into the walls for storage and personal belongings. Wine and oil presses appeared on several levels, not as decorations, but as functioning production spaces where people actually crushed grapes, pressed olives, and produced food while living entirely underground. Deeper still, there were churches with stone altars, a dedicated missionary school, communal kitchens with stone ovens built into the walls, and on the lowest floors, rooms that appear to have served as temporary holding cells. There were even designated spaces for handling the deceased, where chemicals were used to manage decomposition in the enclosed environment. This was not a place where people hid for a few hours. This was a place where people lived, worked, worshipped, learned, and died, all without ever stepping into the sunlight. But the thing that truly sets Derinkuyu apart from every other underground site in the world is not the size, it is the engineering. And once you start looking at the details, you realize that whoever designed this place understood things about airflow, water management, and defensive architecture that would impress engineers working today. Start with the air. More than 50 ventilation shafts were drilled through the rock, some of them reaching 55 meters deep, designed to pull fresh air from the surface and circulate it through every single floor. The temperature underground stays constant all year round, between 13 and 15 degrees Celsius, which means it was cool in the brutal Anatolian summers and warm enough during the freezing winters. People could breathe easily on every level, even the deepest ones, because the shaft system was designed with such precision that air reached everywhere. Then there is the water. The main ventilation shaft doubled as a well, reaching deep enough to tap into a natural underground water source. And here is the detail that still amazes researchers. The well was designed so that it could be accessed from inside the underground city, but sealed off from the surface. If an enemy army occupied the town above, they could not poison the water. The people below would still have clean drinking water, while the people above might find their own wells running dry. That is not luck. That is planning on a level that suggests these builders had experienced siege warfare before and had learned exactly what they needed to survive it. And then there are the doors. Massive circular stones, each one carved from a single piece of rock, weighing anywhere from 200 to 500 kilograms, were placed at critical points throughout the tunnel system. These stones could be rolled into position from the inside, sealing off entire corridors. A small hole was drilled through the center of each door, just large enough for a defender to thrust a spear through if someone on the other side tried to force entry. Once sealed, these doors turned each floor into its own independent fortress. An enemy could break through one level and still face another sealed door on the next, and another after that. Each floor could be isolated, defended, or abandoned independently. The tunnels connecting different levels were deliberately built narrow and low, sometimes barely wide enough for a single person to pass through while crouching. For the residents who knew every twist and turn by heart, this was manageable. For an invading soldier trying to push through unfamiliar darkness in full armor, it was a nightmare. There was no room to swing a weapon, no room to maneuver, and a single defender at the end of a narrow passage could hold off a line of attackers who had no ability to move past each other. Some passages led to deliberate dead ends, designed to confuse and trap intruders. The people who built Derinkuyu did not just want to hide,
They wanted to make sure that anyone who came looking for them would deeply regret it.
Now, if you have been paying attention, you are probably asking yourself the same question that has driven historians and archaeologists a little bit crazy for decades. Who built this place? And the honest answer, the one that makes this story so fascinating, is that nobody can say for certain. The most widely accepted theory points to the Phrygians, a powerful civilization that dominated central Anatolia around the 8th and 7th centuries before the Common Era. The Phrygians were master builders who were known for carving monumental structures into rock, and the timeline aligns with the earliest estimated construction at Derinkuyu. But other researchers believe the origins go back even further, to the Hittites, who controlled the region as far back as 2,000 years before the Common Era. If that is true, it means someone began carving Derinkuyu roughly 4,000 years ago, during a time when the Egyptian pyramids were still relatively new. And then there are the more adventurous theories. Some researchers have connected underground cities like Derinkuyu to the Younger Dryas event, a sudden and devastating climate shift that occurred about 12,800 years ago, possibly caused by a comet impact. If there is any truth to that, and it remains deeply debated, Derinkuyu could be one of the oldest intentional human constructions on Earth. What is not debated is that the city was expanded and modified by nearly every civilization that passed through the region over the following 3,000 years. And here's something worth sitting with. Just 600 kilometers to the east of Derinkuyu sits Göbekli Tepe, one of the oldest known temple complexes ever discovered, built roughly 12,000 years ago by people whose sophistication we are only now beginning to appreciate. If ancient civilizations in this part of the world were capable of monumental stone construction that far back in time, the idea that they were also capable of carving sophisticated underground shelters is suddenly not so difficult to believe. We keep underestimating these people, and they keep proving us wrong.
Here is what we do know. Early Christians fleeing persecution under the Roman Empire arrived in Cappadocia and discovered the existing tunnel networks. And they did not just hide in them, they transformed them. Over several centuries, Christians dramatically expanded Derinkuyu, adding churches with carved stone crosses, baptismal pools, the missionary school on the second floor, and communal worship spaces deep underground. Greek inscriptions found on the walls confirmed their long presence. For these communities, Derinkuyu was not just a hiding place, it was a sanctuary where an entire way of life could continue in secret while the world above remained hostile. They taught their children underground, they baptized new converts underground, they pressed wine for communion underground. They built a complete spiritual community in a place where no Roman soldier could ever find them. And it worked. For centuries it worked. When Arab armies swept through Anatolia during the 7th and 8th centuries, the same tunnels provided refuge again. When the Mongol invasions reached the region in the 14th century under the forces of Timur, the underground cities once again proved their worth. There is a historical account of one of Timur's commanders being sent to flush out people hiding underground, and the mission ended when the commander was struck by an arrow fired through the small hole in one of those massive stone doors. The most feared army in the world stopped cold by a hole in a rock.
And now, think about this for a moment. The Christians had Rome to hide from. The Byzantines had Arab raiders. The later populations had the Mongols. Each of those groups had a clear and present enemy on the surface. But the original builders, the ones who first started carving into the rock all those centuries or possibly millennia before, who were they running from? What was so threatening, so dangerous, so persistent that they committed to one of the most ambitious building projects in ancient history, not building upward toward the sky the way most civilizations do, but downward, away from the surface, away from the light, as deep into the earth as they could go. That is not what people do when they are dealing with the occasional raiding party. That is what people do when they believe the surface itself is not safe. Some historians believe it was simply the constant threat of invasion that defined life in ancient Anatolia, one army after another rolling through the region century after century. That explanation is practical and probably at least partially correct. But others look at the sheer depth and sophistication of the original construction and feel that something more must have been at work. Whatever it was, the people who started Derinkuyu were not building for a single emergency.
They were building something that would last for generations. And it did. One of the most fascinating details is that Derinkuyu was not alone. Archaeologists believe a tunnel stretching roughly 9 kilometers connects Derinkuyu to another underground city called Kaimakli. 9 kilometers of hand-carved tunnel through volcanic rock, linking 2 entire underground populations. And these 2 cities are just part of a much larger network. The Cappadocia region contains over 200 known underground settlements, and experts believe many more have not yet been found. In 2013, construction workers in the nearby city of Nevşehir accidentally broke into what appears to be yet another underground city, one that some researchers believe could be even larger than Derinkuyu. The full picture of what lies beneath this region has never been fully mapped. We are still discovering it, and every new discovery raises the same question. How many more are down there?
Now, close your eyes for a second and imagine what it actually felt like to live in Derinkuyu during a siege. Thousands of people, entire families, packed into carved stone rooms lit only by oil lamps. The flicker of torchlight on smooth rock walls. The sound of children somewhere in the tunnels. The smell of animals on the upper floors. Bread baking in stone ovens. Wine fermenting in underground presses. The constant, cool stillness of air that has been filtered through 50 ventilation shafts drilled into the rock above your head. No wind, no rain, no sunrise. No way to tell morning from midnight except by the rhythm of your own body. And somewhere above you, on the surface, whatever sent you down here is still there, waiting. You cannot see it, you cannot hear it. You just know that the stone doors are sealed and the tunnels are narrow, and for now, you are safe. That was life in Derinkuyu. Not for days, for weeks, sometimes months. And the people who lived through it did not just survive. They maintained schools where children learned to read and write by lamplight. They held worship services in churches carved so deep into the earth that no sound could ever reach the surface. They pressed wine and oil and baked bread in stone ovens. They told stories to keep their children calm. They sang hymns to keep their spirits from breaking. They kept their communities together in total darkness, underground, for as long as it took. And when the threat above finally passed, and they climbed back up into the daylight, blinking against a sun they had not seen in weeks, they returned to their homes and their fields as if nothing had happened, until the next time. And there was always a next time. That is not just engineering. That is something deeply, profoundly human. Over 600 separate entrances to the underground city have been found so far, hidden in private homes and courtyards throughout the town. That means the entire population could vanish from the surface almost simultaneously, slipping underground through access points scattered across the settlement. One moment, a busy town. The next, empty streets. Silence. No sign of where anyone went. For an approaching army, it would have been disorienting in a way that is hard to even imagine. You march into a town expecting resistance or surrender, and instead you find nothing. No people, no livestock, no food. Just an empty village sitting on top of a secret that you do not even know exists. The people of Derinkuyu did not fight their enemies on the surface. They simply disappeared. And they had been perfecting that disappearing act for thousands of years.
The last community to use Derinkuyu was the Cappadocian Greeks, a Christian population that had called this region home for centuries. Even as late as 1909, when news of violence in the distant city of Adana reached Cappadocia, a large portion of the local population retreated into the underground city and refused to sleep above ground for several nights. 3,000 years after construction began, and the system still worked. The doors still sealed, the ventilation still flowed, the water still ran. But in 1923, everything came to an end. A population exchange between Greece and Turkey forced the Cappadocian Greeks to leave their homes.
The people who had maintained Derinkuyu for generations, who knew every tunnel by heart, who understood every hidden door and secret passage, were suddenly gone. And with them went the living knowledge of the city. Entrances were blocked, tunnels filled with debris. Within a single generation, the greatest underground refuge ever built was forgotten entirely. It sat there in silence for 40 years, waiting beneath the town, until a man chasing his chickens accidentally broke back through the wall.
Today, if you visit Derinkuyu, you can descend into the tunnels yourself. You pay a small entrance fee and follow a marked path down through the excavated levels. The passageways are narrow, the ceilings are low, the air is cool and still. Torchlight has been replaced by electric bulbs, but the feeling is the same. You are walking through rooms that were carved by hand thousands of years ago, and not one of them has collapsed. Not one ventilation shaft has failed. Not one support pillar has cracked. The engineering has outlasted earthquakes, invasions, abandonment, and the slow grind of centuries. And the most incredible thing is that you are only seeing a fraction of what exists. Only about half of the underground city has been explored, and just 10% is open to the public. The rest remains sealed, unlit, and unknown. Tunnels lead into darkness that no modern researcher has followed to the end. Rooms sit in perfect silence, their original purpose still a mystery. Whatever else is down there, it has been waiting a very long time.
Here is what stays with me about Derinkuyu. It would have been so much easier to build a wall. Every other civilization in history, when faced with a threat, built walls. They built castles, they built fortresses, they built barriers between themselves and whatever was coming. The people of Derinkuyu did something completely different. They did not try to keep the danger out. They removed themselves from the equation entirely. They went down. They dug into the earth and created a world where the surface did not matter anymore, where armies and empires and even the weather could not reach them. And they did it with hand tools, oil lamps, and a determination that lasted longer than most civilizations survive. Whatever knowledge they had, whatever drove them underground, whatever they were protecting themselves and their families from, they met it with an answer so extraordinary that we are still trying to fully understand it thousands of years later. Think about that the next time someone tells you the ancient world was primitive. The people who built Derinkuyu solved problems of ventilation, water management, structural engineering, urban planning, and defensive architecture, all without a single machine, all by firelight, all while raising families and keeping communities alive in total darkness hundreds of feet below the earth. We build skyscrapers today and call ourselves advanced. They built an inverted skyscraper into solid rock with hand tools, and we still cannot figure out exactly how or why they started. The ancient world is full of places that make you rethink what you thought you knew. Derinkuyu is one of those places. Not because it is dramatic or flashy or covered in gold, but because it is quiet. It sits underneath an ordinary town, behind ordinary walls, beneath ordinary streets. And it holds a secret that most people will never hear about. But now you have. And if this is the kind of story that makes you look at the ancient world a little differently, if it makes you wonder what else might be hiding beneath the surface of what we think we know, then subscribe to this channel right now, because we are just getting started. There are places out there that the history books forgot, places that were buried, abandoned, and erased from memory, and we are going to find every single one of them. Hit that subscribe button, leave a comment telling me what ancient mystery you want us to explore next, and I will see you in the next one.